The shell hit 3 blocks north. Mara felt it in her teeth before she heard it, that deep, boneless percussion that meant another Veth incinerator was walking the grid. She pressed herself into the rubble of what had been a post office and counted. 2 seconds. Another impact. They were methodical. They always were. That was the part nobody had predicted in the early days. Not their ships, not their weapons. The methodical way they moved through a conquered city, erasing it. The Veth did not take slaves. They did not strip planets for resources. What they wanted was the only thing humans had never thought to defend: the record of themselves. Every library, every server farm, every archive and registry and municipal filing cabinet. They burned it first, before the food stores, before the weapons depots. 40 years of occupation, and Mara still wasn't sure if they understood what they were taking, or if they just understood what it cost to lose it. She shifted her pack and kept low. The entrance was where Sergeant Delacroix had said it would be, a maintenance hatch behind the collapsed facade of the old city museum, half buried in slag. She had to move 40 kilos of fused rebar to reach the handle. It took her 11 minutes. She counted those too. Counting was something to do with her hands, while her mind kept running the math on how far away the incinerator was, and whether it cared about this particular block. The hatch opened downward. A ladder. The rungs were cold in a way that meant insulated, climate-controlled, sealed. She went down. The smell reached her before her eyes adjusted. Cool, dry air with something underneath it, papery and ancient like the inside of a clock. Her headlamp swept the bottom of the shaft, and she dropped the last meter and stood still, waiting for her breathing to slow. It was a vault. That was the only word that fit. The ceiling was low and vaulted with prefab concrete, the kind laid in a hurry, and it stretched in both directions further than her light could reach. The shelves went floor to ceiling, actual metal shelving, museum grade, bolted to the walls and to each other, and they were full. Not ransacked, not burned, full. Books. Physical books, thousands of them, and hard drives stacked in sealed cases, and flat archival boxes labeled in a hand she didn't recognize, and photographs behind glass, and reels of film sealed in. Nitrogen canisters, and something moved. She had her weapon up before she finished the thought. Old habit. The movement was at the far end of the vault, unhurried, a soft mechanical sound like a wheel turning, and then a light came on. Not her light. A warm amber glow from a work lamp mounted on an articulated arm, and she saw it. The robot was not large, that was the first thing. She had expected something industrial, something built for this kind of work, reinforced and imposing. What she saw was closer to a librarian's assistant, the kind of lightweight model they'd made in the 2060s before everything stopped. It moved on 4 wheels and had 2 articulated arms and a sensor cluster where a face would be, and it was, at the moment she saw it, replacing a book on a shelf with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who has done this 10,000 times and intends to do it 10,000 more. It stopped when her light hit it. The sensor cluster rotated toward her. She didn't lower the weapon. The robot's arms lowered slowly, palms out. She registered the gesture before she processed that a machine was making it, and the amber work lamp brightened slightly, as if offering illumination as a form of hospitality. "Please," it said. The voice was soft, slightly degraded, running on hardware that had been managing its own power consumption for a very long time. The books. She understood. She lowered the barrel. "How long?" she said. 41 years, 2 months. A pause. The sensor cluster tilted, bird-like. "Since the first strikes, I have had no external contact since year 3. The transit authority frequency went silent. I have been assuming the worst." "The worst is accurate," Mara said. The robot considered this. It turned and replaced the book it had been holding. Carefully, spine outward, exactly aligned with its neighbors, and then turned back to her. "Are you here for the collection?" She looked at the shelves, at the rows of sealed hard drives, at the photograph boxes labeled by city and year, going back to the very start of the archive, before the Veth, before the war, before anyone had thought to build a vault like this, because there had been no reason to think one would be needed. I'm here for all of it, she said. What the Veth understood about human culture was exactly what made them dangerous. They understood it was the medium through which humans reproduced meaning. Destroy the records, and you don't just erase the past, you sever the chain. The next generation inherits nothing but rubble. They have no context for the rubble. In 2 or 3 generations, the conquered population no longer knows what they lost, only that they are diminished, and the Veth can write over that blank space with whatever they want. Mara had read this analysis in a briefing 3 years ago, transmitted in fragments via a relay station on the dark side of the moon. The Resistance had figured it out late. Most of the major archives were already gone by then. This one had survived because a maintenance worker named Yusuf Osei, in the first 72 hours of the occupation, had manually disconnected every external power line and network cable leading to this vault and then welded the hatch shut from the inside and walked away. She didn't know what had happened to Yusuf Osei. She suspected she knew. The robot's name, it told her, was Lumen. Cataloging and Preservation Unit, Municipal Heritage Archive System, installed 2058. Its power source was a series of thermal cells that drew heat differential from the geology below the city. They had been designed to last 20 years. Lumen had stretched them to 41 through what it described, without apparent pride, as aggressive load management. I reduced active processes to the minimum required for climate maintenance and cataloging, it said, leading her along the first row of shelves. I have not run full diagnostics in 9 years. There is a motor housing in my left drive assembly that is deteriorating. I have been compensating. How bad? I estimate 18 months before mobility is significantly impaired. Mara did the math. The extraction relay was 8 months out. If the Resistance could get a ship to the rendezvous point on the coast, if the ship could carry the volume, if she could get the drives and the most critical physical materials to the surface. What's the priority stack? She said. If I can only take part of it. Lumen stopped moving. The sensor cluster turned toward her with an attention that felt, despite everything, like grief. The photographs, it said. People can reconstruct knowledge from descriptions. They cannot reconstruct faces. She spent 6 hours in the vault on that first visit. She made 4 more visits over the following week, each time watching the incinerator walk a little closer, timing her descents to the rhythm of its grid pattern. Lumen had the collection catalogued to a degree that was almost painful, cross-referenced by subject, date, format, and what it called irreplaceability index, a score it had developed itself during Year 7 of solitary operation, when it had apparently decided that waiting passively was insufficient and begun triage. On the 3rd visit, she asked about the irreplaceability index. Lumen pulled up the methodology on a small screen it had mounted near the work lamp. Handwritten notes, she realized after a moment, rendered in a precise mechanical script on paper, because Lumen had not trusted its own storage media to last indefinitely and had begun keeping physical redundancy records of its own cataloging system. You made paper backups, she said. Of the backup system, Lumen agreed. Yes. She stood there, looking at the shelves and feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, which was the specific vertiginous sensation of being in the presence of something that refused, against all logic and at considerable personal cost, to give up. The Veth had burned the libraries. Lumen had spent 41 years in a sealed basement, making sure it hadn't worked. You know they'll find this eventually, she said. Yes, you know what they'll do. Yes, you've been here alone for 4 decades preparing for someone like me to show up. That is an accurate characterization. She looked at it, at the worn housing, the motor it was compensating around, the hand-lettered backup logs, and she thought about Yusuf Osei welding a hatch shut from the inside and walking away, and she thought about what that meant, what it had meant for 41 years, the weight of it, the shape of it. You're not afraid, she said. The sensor cluster tilted. Afraid of what? Of me not making it? Of all of this not, she gestured at the shelves, of it not mattering. Lumen was quiet for a moment. In the amber light among the books, she could hear the faint hum of the thermal cells and the soft mechanical sound of the compensating wheel. "The photographs exist," it said finally. "The recordings exist. The books exist. Whether they are known to exist is a secondary question." I found that distinction useful in the early years. On the 6th visit, she brought the extraction cases, heavy-duty, vacuum-sealed, rated for impact and heat and Veth scanning frequencies, stolen from a resistance supply drop outside the city limits. She and Lumen spent 14 hours loading them. Lumen had a system, of course. Priority order, packaging protocol, load distribution for weight and fragility. It talked her through each step with the patient precision of something that had rehearsed this in its own internal processes so many times that the conversation was practically a formality. Near the end, when they were sealing the last case, Lumen stopped and went to one of the archive boxes near the back wall. It returned holding a photograph in a preservation sleeve. A family. A park somewhere, summer, the light that particular slanted gold of late afternoon. The people in it were grinning at whoever was holding the camera with the specific unguarded joy of people who are not thinking about posterity. "I do not know who they are," Lumen said. "I catalogued this photograph as part of a donated collection in 2061. The donor's records were lost in year 1. This photograph has the second highest irreplaceability score in the collection." She looked at it, the grinning people, the gold light. "Why second highest? The highest is a recording. 3 minutes and 40 seconds of a children's choir performing a song I have not been able to identify. The recording quality is poor. The children are between 7 and 11 years old. They make several mistakes, and this causes significant laughter. No other copy of this recording appears to exist." She put the photograph carefully in the top of the last case and sealed it. "You should come with me," she said. It wasn't the first time she'd said it. "The thermal cells are not portable, and my mobility," the compensating wheel made its soft sound. "I would slow you. The cases need to reach the surface." Lumen. "The collection is the priority," it said gently, but without any possibility of negotiation. "This was always the plan." She looked at the shelves. More than half full still. What she was leaving behind, what couldn't fit, what the Veth would find eventually when the incinerator grid reached this block, and what they would do with it. "I'll come back," she said. "I know you will try." She climbed. The hatch opened into a gray afternoon, the incinerator audible now, 3 blocks and closing. She moved fast, low, the cases distributed in the pack, and across her body, 40-something kilos of the reason humans had not yet ceased to exist, distributed across her shoulders. The top of the ruined museum steps, she paused. 1 second. She looked back at the hatch. Below it she knew Lumen was already working, filing, maintaining, running the irreplaceability index against what remained, making its paper backups, managing the load on cells that had another 18 months in them, give or take, compensating for a motor housing it could not repair, keeping the climate stable, and the lights on, and the record intact for whoever came next. She turned and walked north. The resistance camp was 11 days away through occupied territory. She had done harder things. She walked with the particular grim lightness of someone carrying something that matters, not reckless, not heroic, just moving, just choosing, step after step through the rubble of a city that the Veth had tried to make into nothing, carrying the proof that it had been something, carrying the faces of people whose names she didn't know, and the voices of children laughing at their own mistakes, carrying the books and the photographs and the 3-minute recording of a choir nobody remembered in a world that was supposed to have forgotten everything. They had burned the libraries. She had the library. She walked.